Good evening and welcome to the National Writers Series virtual event with international best-selling author Alan Lightman. He's here tonight to talk about his new book, Three Flames, which was praised by Annie Proulx as his best book since his international bestseller, Einstein's Dreams, which is a collage of fictional stories dreamed by Einstein while working at the Patent Office. Hi, I'm Lisa Thavet, a proud board member of the National Writers Series, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our virtual series. I joined this wonderful nonprofit out of love for the power of storytelling and how it can transform lives, including young lives. Proceeds of our events go to our Raising Writers literacy programs. We are thrilled that Kayleigh Nee Mom has joined us as guest host. She and her family were uprooted by war from her homeland in Cambodia, prompting her to unravel what home means. It led her to work on films about war and refugees, including A River Changes Course, an award-winning documentary. Through her work, she came to know author Alan Lightman, who is a professor of the practice of humanities at MIT. He is also an essayist, physicist, and educator. In addition to Einstein's Dreams, which has been translated into 30 languages, his books include The Diagnosis, which is a National Book Award finalist in fiction, and The Discoveries, Great Breakthroughs in 20th Century Science, named by Discover magazine as one of the 10 best books on science. His partially fictionalized memoir, Screening Room, was chosen by the Washington Post as one of the best books of the year. In 2003, Lightman founded the Harpswell Foundation, a nonprofit organization which empowers women leaders in Cambodia and the developing world. In fact, the foundation has helped support one of our sponsors tonight, Red Dirt Road, a nonprofit in Cambodia where women create and sell silk purses, wallets, scarves, and even masks. It was created and supported in part by Marie Eckstein of Charlevoix and Lynn Alessio of Interlaken. National Writers Series' very own board member, Laura Asiela, was the one who introduced Marie and Alan Lightman, and it's so great to have such a small world. Please join me in welcoming Kayleigh Nee Mom and Alan Lightman.
Hi, I'm very happy to be with you in this virtual world that we all live in now.
Yeah, so happy to see you.
And I'm delighted that my good friend Kalyani is here to talk with us tonight. I wanted to start with a brief summary of the novel Three Flames. It's about a poor Cambodian farming family living in the country. They live in a highly patriarchal society where men totally dominate women. The father of the family, in addition, is rather cruel. He has three daughters and a son. One of his daughters, well, first of all, his wife, Rena, the story begins with her seeing in the marketplace the commander of the Khmer Rouge camp that killed her father. He's in his 70s now, I think. The family has an older daughter named Tida. They have to send her off to the garment factory to pay a family debt. They've got a daughter, Nida, who was married off to a wandering rubber merchant and sent far from home, although she wanted to continue with school. They have a son, Kamal, who falls in love with the most beautiful young woman from the village and wants to marry her, but she lives in the big city and he doesn't know whether he's up to it. He wants to escape the life of the farmer. And then the youngest daughter, Srepul, who is the fire of the family. And she eventually is the one who ultimately challenges the father. So that's all I'll say about the book for now.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. You know, the years that we've gotten to know each other has been so wonderful. And I've read so many of your books. And then I came to read this, and it really touched my heart. Three Flames is just such a beautiful story. I think not just about a poor family, but a heart-wrenching story of a family that is struggling to find meaning and authenticity, acceptance and belonging, and redemption from a past, you know, in order to approach and embrace a new future. And I really resonated with this story because a lot of the family members in this story actually reminded me of my own family. You know, the things that we've been through, the trauma that we've suffered under the Khmer Rouge, and then now here, you know, in the United States. And I feel like that trauma has carried on with us. And you really illustrated it so perfectly and so well. Actually, some of the things that I would love to delve deeper into the book in a moment, but I would love for us to start the conversation just asking you to give a little bit of context, you know, to the book, to your work with Harpsville Foundation, how you came to be in Cambodia in the first place. I mean, you're a renowned physicist. You've written many books about many places. You've written books about the stars, about the accidental universe. How did you come to be in Cambodia, of all places? I'm so curious about that.
Well, my wife and I have a good friend who lives in Maine, and he had been to Cambodia for several years doing some humanitarian work. He was a minister, and I decided that I would like to go there in 2003, so 17 years ago, to see what he was doing. And when I was there, I met a young woman who was about 30 years old at the time, who explained to me that when she had been going to university, that she and a half dozen other female students had to live underneath the university building because there was no housing for female students. The male students could live free in the Buddhist temples or safely rent rooms together.
Yes.
But there was no those opportunities were not open to male students, and the universities in Cambodia still do not have dormitories. I think maybe one university does. So for that simple reason, most women were prevented from higher education. And so this woman, Viesna, and I conceived of the idea of building dormitories for female university students. And that began a foundation called the Harpsville Foundation. And over the following years, I met many of the young women who lived in our dormitories. I went to Cambodia twice a year, every year from 2003 until recently. And I learned a lot of their stories, visited their homes in the countryside, and that inspired me to write this book. I waited 10 years before starting the book because I know that it's very difficult for a white Western man to understand a culture in Southeast Asia, and very sensitive to not imposing my own values or getting the culture wrong. So I waited 10 years. Still, of course, I don't understand the culture fully, but I understand it better than I did 17 years ago.
No, I guess when I'm reading the book, and I actually read it twice, and the second time it touched me even more because there were so many things that you talked about that only a Cambodian person would know. You know, even the words that you use, the Khmer words that you use, these were words that were used in our family. You know, growing up, my parents would make references to these things. And so you had to be a very observant observer, you know, and a very good listener to be able to pick up on all this stuff. Did you have this intention within those 10 years before you started writing to tell these stories? And then what really inspired you, first of all, to start to tell the story of a Cambodian family in particular?
Well, what inspired me was just how much I was impressed by the strength and resilience of the Cambodian people, that despite this terrible destruction in the 1970s by the Khmer Rouge, in which 25% of the population was killed, and especially targeted were people of education, I was very moved by the courage of the people that I met and the determined to get educated. I was also struck by the male chauvinism there,
Yeah.
which you can find all over the world, including the
Yes.
United States. And in working with the Harpsville Foundation, I met a lot of young women who were very courageous and were attempting to challenge the male chauvinism of the country. And so I wanted to write their stories
Yeah.
of how does a young woman who is expected to drop out of school at the age of 13 and work in the rice fields and then perhaps go to the garment factories
Yes.
to send money home. How does a young woman like that, who is expected to do those things, get married at the age of 17? How does she escape from that fate?
Yeah.
There's a great picture of one of the women in the rice fields.
Yeah.
So I wanted to tell that story and also try to understand how these women could have so much courage, because many of them had more courage than I've ever had in my life. And so there they are riding the bus to the garment factory. I think something like a quarter to a third of all young women between the ages of 15 and 22 work in the garment factories.
That's right.
Which are terrible working conditions. And one of the young women and one of the characters in my novel works in the garment factory. Let's see, the other question you asked me was during the 10 years before I began writing the book, was I taking notes or? I wasn't writing that much down, but I was absorbing it. I mean, I was aware that I was learning or being introduced to a culture very different from my own, and it was just exciting. I love learning new things. And
So what's the significance of the three flames? Because I did notice, and you mentioned this, that there's this kind of a tension, between individual free will, and duty to one's family,
Yeah.
to one's culture and tradition.
Right.
It's a very strong tension, and especially within Cambodian families.
Yeah.
And I say this because I grew up in a family where that tension was really strong.
Yeah.
You're struggling to be free and to express your unique voice, but at the same time, you feel compelled to be responsible to your family and to help your family and support your family. What is the significance of the three flames, and how does that tie into the story?
Well, the three flames comes from a Cambodian traditional story called Shabab Saray, which you know more about than I do. But it's basically a book that or a story that all girls and young women are supposed to read, and it's basically rules of behavior for females, and three of the rules are summarized in what are called the three flames. One is never to speak badly about your husband outside of the family. Another one is have complete obedience to your husband, complete, total obedience. And the third is to remember everything that your parents did for you. So those are the three flames. And in my novel, Nida, the night before she's getting married, her mother discusses the three flames with her and says, remember the three flames.
And Nida says that she will remember them and she will uphold them. But then, and all of them, they grew up with a mother, reminding them to uphold the three flames, but there is that tension. I was wondering if you could discuss that tension with
Yes.
Nida and also Tida and
Yes.
Sraipa later on.
Yeah.
They want so much to give, even their bodies, to sacrifice their physical bodies, not only their spirit and their mind, but their bodies to upholding those three
Yeah.
flames.
Mm.
But they also want to be who they are. So I was wondering if you could discuss that tension.
Well, Cambodia, and this loyalty to the parents is true in most Asian countries. China, Korea, Japan. It's not only
Yes.
Cambodia. So it's very common in the Asian world. This fierce loyalty and obligation to the parents. But Cambodia, like many other countries, is moving into the modern world. The internet came 15 years ago, and young people are able to see the larger world through the internet. And in the novel, Nida goes to an internet cafe at one point and sees pictures of Aung San Suu Kyi and pictures of Hillary Clinton, and she sees a soccer game in Brazil, and she's exposed to the larger world, and she sees that Aung San Suu Kyi and Hillary Clinton are strong women, and through that mechanism, this tension begins. More and more Cambodians are getting educated now. I think it was just 2 or 3% with a college education 15 years ago, and now it's up to 5 or 6%. So everything is changing because of you can't keep out the modern world.
Yeah.
The challenge that I have, and I think that many of us have living in more developed countries, is how do you allow certain progressive qualities of the modern world, a higher standard of living, iPhones, all of that, while at the same time preserving a lot of traditional culture.
Exactly.
You don't want to destroy the traditional culture, and that was the tightrope that I've been walking ever since I first set foot in Cambodia in 2003 of trying to encourage these young women to be independent thinkers, but at the same time not stepping too much on their traditional culture.
It's a tightrope indeed.
It's a tightrope.
Yeah. But then what happens is that, as Nita, she longs to leave the country to go to the city. She thinks she's going to Battambang, but she ends up a prisoner in a villa just outside of Battambang. And then Tida goes to the garment factories. She thinks she's going to the garment factories to help support her family, and she's going to have this opportunity to support them. But then she ends up in a brothel, in a nightmare, essentially.
Yeah.
So the dream of the city doesn't really become realized.
No.
It actually becomes a nightmare instead.
Yeah. She's sold into the brothel by her father.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is not uncommon. Well, you managed to completely go beyond your beginnings yourself. How old were you when you came to the U.S., Kalyani?
4 years old.
4 years old.
Yeah. Alan, it's really interesting because as I was reading the book, I wondered, if my family and I did not escape, if we didn't escape to the refugee camps at the border of Thailand and Cambodia, if we didn't come to the United States, if we had stayed in Cambodia, if our situation would have been similar to this family. Because we also lived, in the countryside, well, in an urban place. But, if something had happened to my father, for example, if he passed away during the Khmer Rouge and my mother was left alone, who knows what could have happened too.
Well, I think that you might have been one of our Harpswell students, who most of whom grew up. We have 80 current students and 180 graduates at this point. They almost all of them have come from poor families and living in houses frequently without electricity or running water. But all of them managed to escape the fate of the rice fields.
Yeah.
And often it was because they had encouragement from the mother of the family, sometimes the father, but usually the mother, who
Yes.
wanted her
Like
daughter,
Rina.
yeah, who wanted their daughters to have a life better than what they had. And so it is possible for young women growing up in that condition who are smart and ambitious and have dreams, if they have a little bit of encouragement, they can escape. And I think that's what would have happened to you, even if your family had stayed in Cambodia.
Yeah. But you know what I found really, really interesting, Alan, is that in both the stories of Nita and Tida, not to mention Sreipo, they actually escaped their fate too. You know, you actually, in the story, they have agency and they empowered themselves by murdering their abusers. You know, in the case of Nita, she murdered the woman who was like so horrible to her, you know, and she managed to escape that house. Well, she poisoned her. Yeah.
Well, she carefully,
but it was intentional.
It was
intentional.
Yeah.
And also Tida, when she was waking up from her dream, the brothel was on fire. She had an opportunity to
save the madam.
But she did not. She intentionally did not. And I found those two moments very empowering, actually, because it gave them agency. It gave them this opportunity, even though they were in the worst conditions, they actually made a choice. And that is a choice that is denied so many young women because of tradition and because of culture and because of, you know, what is being, the labels that are placed on them. And that brings me to a discussion I would love to have about the traditional portrayal of women. Because this is something that you did really well, that I was really just shocked by, you know, because you actually kind of nailed it on how women are portrayed traditionally. There's this dichotomy, you know, between the good and the bad women, you know, the Berpun La'o, the good wife, and the Berpun Tipi, the second wife, you know, or the Gon La'o, the good daughter, or the Srai Sampung, you know, the whore. And you know, these were like words that I grew up with in my family. You know, we were taught these words specifically so that we would be, you know, conditioned to become good daughters and good women. But being good was not by our own definition. It was defined by tradition and culture and by the three flames that you were talking about. So I just found it really fascinating that you were able to bring that up, you know, and made it feel so real. And I'm wondering, you know, like where, you know, because like with the situation with Lakana and Sophia, you know, Lakana is the second wife to Plight, you know, and Sophia is the woman that, you know, Kamal tries to marry, and she's so beautiful, but she's considered a whore by everyone else because she's selling her body to rich men. You know, so when you make a choice to be free, you are a bad woman. But if you make a choice, but if you follow your parents to sell your body, like, you know, Nita and Tida did, then you were a good daughter.
Well, isn't it true that even parents who sell or usually fathers sell their daughter into brothels, if their daughter wants to come back home, she's considered dirty.
Exactly.
So she was a good daughter in the sense that she was trying to help the family, and even if the father asked her to prostitute herself, she's not respectable anymore. And in the novel, Sophia, the beautiful woman in the village who goes off to the city, and there's an allusion to the fact that she was probably a prostitute. She lives
Yes.
very well,
Yeah.
and she sends money home, and
And she helps her family.
the
She's
parents
giving
accept the money.
gifts.
Yeah, the parents accept the money, but
But they don't accept her.
they don't let her move into the house. And when she
Yeah,
comes back
yeah.
to the village, she has to stay where somebody else's house. She can't stay in her
Exactly,
house.
exactly. So the threat is not that she sold her body. The threat is that she made the choice herself, and that she freed herself from the conditions of family, culture, and tradition.
Right. Well, I think the threat to the
Yeah,
family is also that she scandalized the family in a way. I
yeah.
mean, even though the family asked her to do this,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and she's helping the family, still they treat her as a whore. I mean, it's so interesting.
Yeah. So I'm really, really curious, like how you, I mean, because it's very complicated. Cambodian culture is actually really complicated. But at the same time, it's also so simplified, in the way that the culture views women. There's the good and there's the bad, and there's no in between, no acceptance of in between. And I'm actually really curious because a lot of your writing, a lot of your research, as a physicist, has been to look into the relativity of life, and not the absolutes. And
Mhm.
I'm curious if, living in Cambodia, working in Cambodia, being with women, the young women, and hearing the stories and learning about the culture, if that has helped to um, you've helped for you to understand more about the other things that you questioned in the world, in the universe, or has it
Well,
like created more questions even more?
certainly created questions, and I don't pretend to understand that much. But I think that it certainly has helped me as a human being
Hmm.
to. I mean, I think this is what travel does. Whenever you go to a culture that's different from your own,
Yes,
it expands your mind, and you
definitely.
see the way that you have been living with certain assumed values and certain
Hmm.
conditions is not the only way to live. So I think travel is a great thing, for everyone, but certainly my experience in Cambodia and other countries in Southeast Asia has expanded my mind, um, to a great extent. Uh, I think, dignity is another word that we should mention. That I think that the women, in the novel, and also the young women that I have met with the Harpsville Foundation, they have a dignity to them, um, that I think it's interesting. How does dignity relate to independence of mind
Hmm.
and ability to challenge tradition?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
it is complicated, as you said, but it seems to me that all of the characters that I've written about in this novel, except for the father, have a certain amount of dignity.
Hmm. And the father did too. And I think this is an achievement for you, Ellen, because when I read the book the second time, I actually had a sensitivity and compassion for him. I really hated him at first. I was just like, oh my God, this guy's horrible. How could he be so terrible? And he felt very one dimensional. But when I read the chapter about him the second time, I felt like I could understand him. And I could feel that he was a victim of trauma himself.
Yeah. Yes.
He was traumatized as a child. His father called him a devil,
Yeah.
and that he didn't, and even they made fun of him growing up, that he
Mhm.
didn't belong in the family. He wasn't part of the family, that they picked him up somewhere, and so he never felt that belonging within his own
Right.
family,
Mhm. Yeah.
which kind of outcasted him and led him to find a gang of bicycle thieves to belong to. And that outcasted him even more and angered him to the point where he blinded his brother. and then they shunned him completely.
Yeah.
So being a victim of this trauma, I can imagine now how he would be such an angry person, and
Yes.
why he would want to like control everything so much, including his daughters and his
Well, I think
children.
whenever you look, first of all, there's nobody who's all good or all
Yeah,
evil. All of it's
exactly.
complicated. If you write a novel and you have a character who's all good and all evil, you stop believing the character, and then the whole novel is dead.
Mhm.
So any novelist knows that characters are complex. But if you look into the background of someone, even someone who appears to be malicious and evil, you often can find reasons for why they became who they became. And that's why I put this chapter
Mm.
about the father, not near the beginning of the book, but towards the
Mhm.
middle or the end. We,
Yes.
we come to know him as a terrible man who's capable of flaunting his mistress in front of his wife, who's capable of
Mm.
selling his daughter to a brothel,
Yes.
who yanks one of his daughters out of school and forces her into an arranged marriage. But I wanted to show how he got that way and even
Mhm.
develop a little bit of sympathy for him.
Exactly.
And that's why I added that chapter going back
Mhm.
30 years or more, 35 years, showing how he grew up and the trauma that he faced, as you said,
Mhm.
and growing up, and how he and that doesn't make you completely excuse
Of
someone,
course.
but it makes you understand. And I think when we understand each other,
Mhm.
there's a possibility of communication.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and actually that's how you started the story too, with Rena, and Duc Peng, the Khmer Rouge
Right.
cadre, who killed her father.
Mhm.
She had every reason to kill him too, but then she doesn't. I love for you to describe that and why you chose to go that path. And also one of the most touching moments for me in the book is when she is making the diapers with him at the end. She invites him to make diapers with her for her daughter Nita.
Yeah,
And it's
this is
such
the commander of
a
the camp that
yeah,
killed her father.
exactly. And he's making diapers. And it's such a touching moment because it's like it's a moment where the ordinary actually becomes extraordinary.
Yeah,
Not only in the making of the diapers, but in the acceptance of what he had done to her father. Not
yeah,
acceptance, but the ability to forgive.
yeah. Well, yes, I mean, Rena, the wife, the mother of the family, has been wanting to seek revenge all of her life against this commander of this Khmer Rouge camp who killed her father. And when she sees him, he's an old man.
Mm,
And the first thing she notices is that he's an old man. And that begins these wheels
yes.
turning of understanding him. And
Mm,
they meet a number of times over a period of months, and eventually she invites him into her house. Um, I don't know whether she quite forgives him,
mhm, mhm.
but she comes to some kind of reconciliation
Yes,
with him.
yes.
Do you think that we should ask Marie
Mhm.
Eckstein to join us at some point, or
Sure, that's fine. Whatever
uh,
you'd like, Alan.
uh, I know you've got. We saw some of your wonderful pictures at the beginning. I wish we had time to talk to show a clip from your film, A River Changes Course, which is a prize-winning film about the environmental destruction in Cambodia. And I think it won the prize for the best international film at Sundance. I mean, incredible achievement. Uh, uh, Marie Eckstein is a friend of mine who um, went to Cambodia with me about 6 or 7 years ago. She's from Michigan, and she wanted to see what the Harpswell Foundation was about.
Mm,
And she went out to this village where we had started a sewing project. We'd taken a woman that had been from the village who had been working in the garment factories, and we trained her to sew and got her a machine.
Mm.
And she started a sewing business, which was, just limping along because I have no business sense whatsoever. And Marie, being not only an engineer, an executive at Dow Corning, former CEO of a steel company, knew all about business and many other things. And she was able to turn this fledgling sewing business into a real thriving business. So
Alan,
I think
we actually have Marie with us right now.
Yeah, maybe Marie can talk for a bit about her work in Cambodia.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Loud and
we
clear.
can.
Okay, I'm having some technical difficulties. I don't know why, but so Alan, you were asking, you said talk about some of the work in Cambodia, and what I've done there is really an outgrowth of what Alan got started. And I went to Cambodia back 10 years ago. Alan invited me to meet him over there because I was interested in learning more about the Harpswell Foundation and his leadership centers for educating women and developing them as leaders. And so I went there, and when I was there, he asked me if, in fact, I would like to go with him to a village he was going to visit the next day that was in rural Cambodia. And he warned me it was going to be a very long trip, and it would be up in a car for 3 hours over terrible roads. And but would I like to go? So I agreed to go. And when we got there, and it was a very long trip, Alan introduced me to Sally. And Sally had started a business with Alan's help after she had worked in the garment industry for 6 years. She had wanted to come back to her village and start her own sewing business. Alan had paid for her to have sewing lessons and to come back to the village and teach. She taught 12 other village women how to sew, and he bought them 2 treadle sewing machines because there's no electricity or running water in this village. So when I met him, or we met Sally, she was actually, she was sewing all kinds of very fancy clothes, and she couldn't sell anything. So she really needed help. And I thought to myself, well, hey, I can sell chemicals. Certainly I can sell silk garments. And that was the start of things. I found out that there's a big difference between selling garments, and selling chemicals. It's an emotional buy, not a functional buy. So at any rate, we started with selling small things to my friends. Basically, it became an export business, and we now have 14 women. We have a new workshop in the village, and we sell everything in the United States, and everything in the United States is done by volunteers. And we send all the net proceeds back to the women in their village. So where this really, the book, Alan, we're talking about tonight, Tita in the book went to work in the garment factories. And Sally had been in the garment factories for 6 years, from the time she was 21 through 27. And she had left feeling depressed and really felt sick. And so her throat was sore all the time because of the chemicals, of the fumes that the clothing gave off as they sewed in these very hot factories that were very crowded and they stood by these machines. It was just difficult conditions. So at any rate, that to me reminds me of what many, many women, young women in Cambodia still to this day have to put up with. And so I'm just so thrilled that after 30 years in the chemical industry and in my retirement years, I can help women in Cambodia build their own business and stay at home with their children and their families and be independent. And they've just gained stature in the village. They're the ones making money. I've seen a change in the women, especially in Sally, in their confidence and the way they smile. It's just wonderful to see.
Well, thank you, Marie. I mean, Marie really made this business work. So she deserves a tremendous amount of credit for this, for the Red Dirt Road. I wonder where we would have a couple of minutes to show a clip from Kalyani's film. She has a section of her film that actually shows a young woman going into the garment factory and working there. Can we do that?
ដូចបាយទី2 និយាយរួមទៅស្រីខ្មែរមករោគចាក់ទាំងអស់ហ្មងនិយាយទៅទូទៅហ្មងតែងតែបាយទី2ព្រោះយើងនៅស្រែវាគ្មានដីស្រែអីគ្រប់គ្រាន់ គេខាងក្រសួងគេតម្លើងប្រាក់ខែឲ្យបានប្រាក់ខែ61ហើយយើងថែមម៉ោងថែមអីទៅវាបានដល់100ដែរ
It's great. I just wanted to add that most of the women who work in these garment factories, they live 3 or 4 or 5 young women to a room. They live in really squalid conditions near the factories, and they send home whatever money they can each month. I think they send home most of the money that they earn to their parents. And many of them are just burned out like Salih was after 4 or 5 years. Do we have time for some questions? I don't know whether we have any questions.
I think we have a bunch of questions here. there's a question for you, Alan. It says, I've enjoyed all your books, especially Einstein's Dreams and Mr. G. The book you are discussing tonight is a bit of a departure, unless one calls it an exploration of the University of the Heart. I'm guessing I'm asking, do you see this book as a departure?
No, it's a huge departure. I mean, I've written other novels, but none beyond my own culture. So this is a big departure. But of course, spending 15 years in Cambodia is also a big departure from my life. Another question. How much money would these women have to make a month for it to be a living wage in Cambodia?
Yeah, I think it's like
Kalyani would have a better answer to that than me.
Yeah, I think it's about, at least a few years ago, it was 160 a month, about 160 a month to be a livable wage. That was back in 2013 that she was making that much. And it's just a bit more with overtime, but it's definitely not livable with the amount of money she was making at that time.
But the women in the garment factories send most of the money home. So even if they're making $150 a month,
they will send most of it home.
Yeah, they'll try to live on 40 or 50. I think they can rent a really, really cheap room for about 50 or 60 a month.
And if they share it with others, it would be.
And they share with
20,
others, it comes down to
20 a month or so.
Right.
And then electricity.
And on food, used to be you could live on $1 or $2 a day. Does that sound right, Kalyani?
Yes. They spend very little bit of money on food.
Yeah. Another question, perhaps? What resistance have you come across in your effort to change the plight of women in Cambodia? Good question. That's from Ken Winter. Certainly some resistance. One of the things that we try to help with our young women while they're living in the dormitories is to teach them not only critical thinking skills, but how to navigate a world controlled by men. So you don't want to get squashed as soon as you speak up. So you actually have to be smarter than your boss to navigate around. But Kalyani, you probably know more than I do about how women are advancing in Cambodia. What would you say?
I think they are, especially the young women. They want to get an education. In the city, they are going to school just as many are going to school as the men are. In the countryside, of course, it's different, and that's where the Harpsville Foundation comes in. But in the city, women are going for jobs and becoming educated and doing things that and studying fields that many men used to be dominated by men. So I think it's really changing very rapidly. But at the same time, many of the women, even though they have opportunities, they also have a lot more responsibility. I think that the responsibility of supporting their family has become even greater than before because of the opportunities that they have. So just like the garment factory, women who are coming from the countryside, they are using their money, like you say, to support their families. And the women who have more opportunities are also doing the same. So more responsibilities, more opportunities also means increased responsibility, unless there's some kind of intervention to give these women some breathing space. because of that expectation, again, for women to support their families and be good daughters.
Mm-hmm. There's a question from Mary K. Walsh, which is a really wonderful question and a very difficult one. I always wonder if I should or should not buy clothes that I know are made in these factories. How can I best support these young women? So the ultimate question is, are the young women who work in factories, are they better off or worse off if you support the factories by buying clothes from them? And I think that even though the conditions are deplorable in the factories, that the women would be worse off if they didn't have this job, that they would be at home working in the rice fields. They would be married off sooner. But I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I think this is a very complicated question for me because, in my experience, when I made this film, I lived with Q, who you saw in the film. She came from Sveidiang and she came to the factories to work in the factories. And she said it's complicated, because on the one hand, she has this opportunity to make some money, but her health is declining. She's away from her family. A lot of the women, some of them are away from their children even,
Right.
So they're completely divided in half. They feel like they're not really living life. She says she comes home, she cooks, she makes some food, she goes to sleep, she wakes up, and then she goes and she works for someone else again. So on the one hand, you have this opportunity to work and make some money, but your life is not your own. You're almost like a walking ghost. And that's kind of the story that you told about Tida. She was like a ghost.
Yeah.
Her life was neither, she was like living a waking life, but not really living life. And so I think that opportunities like what you're providing, with the Harpswell Foundation, is the kind of opportunities I would love to see more of, for more women to have the opportunity to be educated, to go to school and to find work that is fulfilling for them. And the garment factory work, it may help them in the short term, but it might be detrimental to them in the long term. So it is a very complicated question.
Yeah, it is a complicated question. And of course, it's not just Cambodia, but in many countries that have factories with low wages.
Yeah. And actually now in Cambodia, a lot of families are sending their children to other countries, to South Korea, to Thailand, to Singapore, to work as domestic workers or restaurant workers, and they're not being paid a living wage, or they're being exploited and treated poorly.
Right.
So until there are protections for them, their future is actually very grim.
There's a question from Lisa Jennison. Is the father based on a real person? What about any of the girls? Well, none of the characters in my novel are based on particular people. Like all writers, I try to meet and learn about lots of different people, and when my characters sort of amalgamations of many people that I've met. So there's no single person or that was the model for either the father or the daughters, but I do think that there are many men in Cambodia like the father of this family, and many young women who are like the daughters and the wife.
Actually, I think some people are interested in learning more about the foundation, Alan. If you could talk more about the foundation.
Yes. Well, we we started in around 2005. That's when we built our first facility. And our dormitories are more than just dormitories. We have first of all, our students attend 20 different universities in the capital city, Phnom Penh. We're not attached to any one university. And in the evenings and weekends, when our students are not attending their regular university classes, we have a required in-house academic program, which is equivalent to a second university degree. And it includes analyzing national and international news. It includes expository writing, debate classes to educate in critical thinking, comparative genocide studies, where the students compare the Khmer Rouge genocide with other genocides in the century. We have classes in civic engagement, where the students learn how to do projects of social benefit. And we have English classes. So almost all of our students speak much better English than I do. A few years ago, we expanded beyond Cambodia, and now we have a program based in Malaysia for young women from all of the countries of Southeast Asia. It's not a long-term residential program like in Cambodia, but it does have a couple of weeks of critical thinking and leadership skills. So that's a little bit more about the foundation.
That's great, thank you. And then I think Alison Pavia is interested in how the book has been received in Cambodia.
I didn't see her question.
Yeah, it's at the very bottom.
Okay. Well, Alison Pavia is the executive director of the Harpsville.
Oh, great.
Made it a professional organization, which it, and what is her question again?
Yeah, she's wondering how the book has been received in Cambodia.
Oh, yes. Well, I think it's been received pretty well. It was just translated into the Cambodian language, which is called Khmer, just a couple of months ago.
That's wonderful.
So I'm just beginning to hear. I think it's a little too soon to say how it will be received in Cambodia.
I'm so curious to hear how the young women receive it.
Well, I've gotten good feedback, or I should say positive feedback from our students who have read the book.
And how some of them responded to it?
Well, they say that it rings true, like you did, and are wondering how I learned so much about Cambodia.
I know, that's exactly what I wonder. But you are a really good observer.
Well, I learned from talking to them. I just listen. And of course, when I had the first draft of the book written, I sent it to a number of Cambodian friends, including you, Kalyani, to point out mistakes that I had made, cultural mistakes. And you have to understand a culture better for writing fiction than for writing nonfiction, because fiction has all of the little mannerisms and habits of daily life.
Yes, that's why I was just so impressed. Yeah.
Well, I did make a few mistakes in the first draft, but I got them corrected. For example, in the first draft, in the first chapter, the father, Pick, is having an argument with his youngest daughter, Suripul, wants her to leave school, and they finally make up. And in my first draft, I had him kiss her on the forehead.
Oh yeah, that would not.
perfectly normal in the United States or almost any Western country, but my Cambodian spies told me that a 50-year-old man would never kiss his 14-year-old daughter on the forehead. He might tap her on the shoulder,
Yes.
but he would never kiss her on the forehead. That's the kind of little sort of cultural nuance that that I would miss.
That's a really interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions?
Here's an interesting one from Kristen Rabe. What role does religion, Buddhism, play in the challenges and or opportunities faced by your characters or for women within the society?
Yeah. Well, Cambodia is well, you can answer this better than I can. It's largely a Buddhist country with about 5% Muslims. My observation is from looking at the students in our dormitories is that religion does not seem to play a big role in their daily lives. That they go home for the holidays and for the Chumben, the ancestor worship day, and other religious holidays. But other than that, I don't see much evidence in their day-to-day lives and in their religious training. And what do you think, Kalyani?
Yeah, I think you're right about that, you know, because when people ask me, like, what is your religion? I say Buddhist as a culture, but not really religion, because we grew up with it more as a culture thing, you know, and a philosophy than as a religion.
Yeah.
And yeah, we observed the religious holidays, but it wasn't like a daily thing. I think what really was more powerful, and I think this is what you also underlined really well with this book, was the traditional and cultural norms, you know, the beliefs and the norms that kind of controlled people's lives and that were passed down generation to generation by mothers and fathers. You know, you need to respect your parents, don't talk back to your parents, be a good daughter, you know, these like things were like drilled into our heads. So I think that was had more of a power control over us than religion did.
And there is a belief in ghosts and the spirits of ancestors.
Exactly.
So that's something which I can see in our students.
Yeah, and actually that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about in our discussion was how you brought up the spirits, you know, and the ghosts and how they were just living, you know, all around. They weren't just in the cemetery, you know, they were on the road, they were in the house, they were omnipresent. And you really captured that really well too, because I kind of wondered about that, because not only did you have ghosts and spirits in the book, but you also had this like fluidity about time and space. You know, there's like a fluidity between like past and present and future, which is also very Cambodian too. You know, like the way that we see time and space is not so linear, you know, it's actually much more cyclical. And I kind of wondered, you know, if like learning about Cambodian culture helped you to understand, you know, the universe better.
Well, I'll say yes. Yes. I understand so much more about the universe than I did.
Yeah. No, because I love that moment on page 161, you know, when Srepo, you know, she's laying on the ground and she's looking and gazing up at the stars, and she sees herself as this dot, you know, this dot in the present between past and the future. And in Cambodian culture, that, you know, that is how we see life, that our dot is not separate. It's not separate from our ancestors. It's also not separate from the future generations to come. We are connected by a line, you know, that is infinite. And you really represented that well. And it kind of reminded me of, your other book, Searching for Stars on an Island in Maine. That's like a favorite of mine. When you begin it like laying down on the boat, you're in Maine and you're on that island and you're looking up at the stars, just like Sarai Boat, also contemplating the same thing. So it's just like when you brought those things together, it just made me feel like this book, I'm just going to plug in again, is it goes beyond just about a Cambodian family. It's not just about a poor Cambodian family or about poor Cambodia or about the Khmer Rouge. It's actually about the human condition, and the mysteries of life, and our questions about the bigger things and the smaller things too, which are all important.
Well, thank you for that. Do we have time to take any more questions? When do we have to wrap this up? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I thought it was supposed to end in an hour. Do we have? Okay, I think we've been given the sign to wrap up. I just want to say thank you, Alan, for this conversation, and encourage everyone to go to your local bookstore and get a copy. I read it twice. So I encourage everyone to read it at least once. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your ideas, and also not only for the book, Alan, but for your commitment to Cambodia. It's been really an honor and a pleasure to get to know you and to know of your work and to see what you're doing.
Well, I would like to thank you, Kalyani, and I'm an admirer of your work as a filmmaker and your amazing career, being an undergraduate at Yale and then getting a law degree and being a prominent filmmaker, but especially the sensitivity in your film and also your writing, which I've been reading, that I think you are really not only introducing the world to Cambodia, but also issues that you're interested in, like the oppression of women, the environmental destruction that's being done to the world, the importance of family. These are universal issues that we all can learn from. So thank you for being who you are.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for being who you are, Alan.
And thank you to the National Writers Series for inviting me and Kalyani to participate in your series.
Thank you. Thank you to Carl and Anne and Jillian and Ben for organizing this and making this all possible. Thank you all so much. And thank you all to everyone who's listening in. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Okay, everyone have
Thanks so much for coming. I hope you'll buy a copy of Three Flames. It's available online, of course, but we're hoping you'll choose your favorite independent bookstore, especially during these challenging times for retail. Please consider donating to the Harpswell Foundation and buying masks at Red Dirt Road to help support their important work. Thanks so much again to our donors and major supporters: Cordia, the Northwest Michigan Arts and Culture Network, Red Dirt Road, Northwestern Michigan College, and the Traverse City Record Eagle. This event is also made possible in part by the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs and the National Endowment for the Humanities. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.